First, we go to Major Doron Spielman, who's spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, and joining me from Tel Aviv. Thank you for coming on board, Major. So I read that this terrorist was almost found by chance, by accident. What details can you give my audience? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick, and thank you for having me. Well, I would say it was a stroke of good luck, more than chance. We had been operating in southern Gaza because we knew that Sinwar and his terror associates were in that area. That was what, according to our intel. The issue was he was in tunnels, possibly with our hostages. So we engaged in a strategy to try to flush him out. We had been closing down the various tunnels that he created and narrowing his range of influence, hoping that he would act as a fugitive. He did go onto the fugitive move. He left the tunnels and was going house to house. What happened was our troops spotted three terrorists in a house. We could not, of course, identify who they were. We approached them. They threw grenades. So our troops backed off and a tank fired a shell, at which point we identified that two of the terrorists went in one direction. Another terrorist went into the second floor of a building adjacent. We flew a drone into the building and we identified a terrorist sitting on a chair. He threw stuff at the drone and tried downing the drone. A tank fired at the building. And a short time later, our troops identified a person who looked like the wanted terrorist Yahya Sinwar. And so the strategy worked. Exactly knowing that it was him was truly a gift for us, I think for the world. This was the terror mastermind of October 7th, as you said, person that almost every Israeli family was directly affected by.
How significant is this for ongoing operations in the area, Major?
It's going to be critical. Yahya Sinwar was calling all of the shots. He was calling the shots both in terms of negotiations. He was also in charge of the military strategy taking place in Gaza. He was doing it based on a courier system, but the overall strategy of Gaza, starting with October 7th and ending yesterday at October 17th, a year later, every move was directed by Yahya Sinwar. Again, we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch, but the head of that organization is gone, which presents an opportunity, hopefully for change, perhaps for simple Gazans to take back their city and their land. We saw them celebrating in the streets, and we're hoping that this leads to a better future for them and, of course, for Israel.
Borrowing words from the late Sir Winston Churchill, could it be the beginning of the end, Major?
Of course, that's what we're hoping for. Nick, we're a small country. We've been fighting for 12 plus months, and we've lost a lot of soldiers. People have been coming under rocket attack. If this is equivalent to toppling, let's say, Hitler in World War II, which brought down eventually the Nazi regime and that ideology and created the Germany of today, that's what we're hoping for. But we are going to have to remain vigilant. Again, there are those who will try to replace Sinwar, and we have to act so that the voices of freedom, the voices that want a new future, that young generation, are able to be heard and are not shut down by the old guard. So the old guard is very much in the targets of the IDF right now.
If you read what the President of the United States, your key ally, is saying, he thinks it might be time to pause, to rethink. How would you react to that, Major?
Well, from our perspective, until those 101 people are home and are safely home, we feel like having a pause at this point would prevent us from fulfilling the mission. Right now, while Hamas is teetering, it's very, very important to carry out the knockout punch to make sure that they can never rise again. We believe that's the best way to bring our hostages home. And that's also an important message also to Iran, to show them that if they threaten Israel's democracy, if they try to annihilate the state of Israel, they're not going to succeed, and we're not going to give them a chance to simply rebuild.
Lastly, Major, can you give my listeners assurance, if whoever takes over now, the terrorist organization, if they were to do a deal, if they were to release the hostages, and please God they are all still alive, the shelling of Gaza would stop?
Well, of course. I mean, there's no question. The last thing that Israel wants to do is to shell Gaza, to be in Gaza. The absolute only reason that the IDF is in Gaza today is because they threaten our southern communities with the shelling and they have our hostages. This could have ended on October 7th or October 8th last year. All they had to do was give back our people, lay down their arms, and stop threatening the people of Israel.
Enjoyed our time today. Thank you, Major. Major Doron Spielman, spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, 12 after 7. Listening, Nicholas Westcott, who's Professor of Practice in Diplomacy at SOAS and a former British ambassador. Thanks for coming on. Good to hear from you again, Professor. 2 questions. What do you think might happen? What do you think should happen? Good morning.
Good morning. I think this has been a significant success for Israel, as the Major has just told you. But what happens next depends on 4 actors, on Hamas itself, on Israel, on Iran, and on the US. And all of those are assessing the impacts of this. As far as Hamas is concerned, Sinwar was not just the architect of October the 7th, he was the architect of Hamas's domination of Gaza, and the fact that the Israelis were very effectively excluded from it. They never penetrated Hamas in the way they did penetrate Hezbollah. And the fact they didn't know where Sinwar was until the very end indicates how solid that solidarity was within the Hamas movement. Who takes over now? We don't know. It's as likely to be somebody hardline as softline. Does it bring the release of the hostages closer? Again, we don't know, because we don't know who now controls where they are and what happens to them. So there is a political vacuum at the head of Hamas, which means their response is very uncertain. Israel, as you heard, is determined to carry on fighting until the hostages are released. That's always been one of their war aims. That is what will happen. The US has been urging a swift move to a more peaceful result, and Iran's view is not known. The key thing now is what Israel judges is going to be the way to get the hostages released. This conflict has always been driven not by Iran, but by the Palestinian question. And until Israel makes some proposal for the solution of that, I don't see an end to the conflict.
Professor, what do we know about the command structure of Hamas? Is there a sort of deputy in waiting?
It's more diffused, I think. I mean, Sinwar was quite clearly the guy calling the shots. I don't know of who his deputy is. He has a brother who is also not yet accounted for, who is certainly influential, and one assumes he may take over. But clearly also their own communication system is at risk. As the Major said, it's probably based on personal couriers. They can't use any electronic communication. So we don't know how leaders communicate with those who are holding the hostages. Therefore, from the Israeli point of view, they have to carry on hunting for the hostages, and that means taking violent action and moving the population around, which is immensely disruptive, terribly damaging.
In your view, what position should the UK take?
The UK, I believe, needs to look at the fundamental problem, which is that this conflict will continue until there is a resolution of the Palestinian question, and that Israel has to address that. At the moment, they're putting it off. They're putting it off by fighting their enemies. There's a risk that they will include Iran in that. They'll go after Iran. That would be a very significant escalation and contagion of the current issue, while still not addressing the problem of Palestine. So,
I will leave it there, Professor. Thank you for your time. Nicholas Westcott, Professor of Practice in Diplomacy at SOAS and a former British ambassador. Is this the day to think? Is this the day to press pause? Is it, now that they have eliminated, to use words, eliminated the leader, victory over evil? What would you like to see happen next? Although, of course, we've heard from the Prime Minister, it will not cease. What should this now possibly mark?